burning papers, and holding no communication with anyone. She wished me to look after the house, to see callers, and answer notes of condolence. One morning, she told me I was at liberty, and she added, "I am obliged to you for your valuable services and discreet conduct. There is some difference between living with such a one as you and with Georgiana. You perform your own part in life and burden no one. Tomorrow," she continued, "I set out for the continent. I shall take up my abode in a religious house near Lisle, a nunnery you would call it. There I shall be quiet and unmolested. I shall devote myself for a time to the examination of the Roman Catholic dogmas and to a careful study of the workings of their system. If I find it to be, as I have suspected it is, the one best calculated to ensure the doing of all things decently and in order, I shall embrace the tenets of Rome and probably take the veil." I neither expressed surprise at this resolution, nor attempted to dissuade her from it. "The vocation will fit you to a hair," I thought. "Much good may it do you." When we parted, she said, "Goodbye, cousin Jane Eyre. I wish you well. You have some sense." I then returned, "You are not without sense, cousin Eliza, but what you have, I suppose, in another year will be walled up alive in a French convent. However, it is not my business, and so it suits you. I don't much care." "You're in the right," she said, and with these words we each went our separate way. As I shall not have occasion to refer either to her or her sister again, I may as well mention here that Georgiana made an advantageous match with a wealthy, worn-out man of fashion, and that Eliza actually took the veil, and is at this day superior of the convent, where she passed the period of her novitiate, and which she endowed with her fortune. How people feel when they are returned home from an absence, long or short, I did not know. I had never experienced the sensation. My journey seemed tedious, very tedious. 50 miles one day, a night spent at an inn, 50 miles the next day. I was going back to Thornfield, but how long was I to stay there? Not long, of that I was sure. I had heard from Mrs. Fairfax in the interim of my absence. The party at the law was dispersed. Mr. Rochester had left for London 3 weeks ago, but he was then expected to return in a fortnight. Mrs. Fairfax surmised that he was gone to make arrangements for his wedding, as he had talked of purchasing a new carriage. She said the idea of his marrying Miss Ingram still seemed strange to her, but from what everybody had said, and from what she had herself seen, she could no longer doubt that the event would shortly take place. "You would be strangely incredulous if you did doubt it," was my mental comment. I don't doubt it. I had not notified to Mrs. Fairfax the exact day of my return, for I did not wish either car or carriage to meet me at Millcote. I proposed to walk the distance quietly by myself, and very quietly, after leaving my box in the ostler's care, did I slip away from the George Inn about 6 o'clock of a June evening, and take the old road to Thornfield, a road which lay chiefly through fields, and was now little frequented. I felt glad as the road shortened before me, so glad that I stopped once to ask myself what that joy meant, and to remind my reason that it was not to my home I was going, or to a permanent resting place, or to a place where fond friends looked out for me and waited my arrival. Mrs. Fairfax will smile you a calm welcome, to be sure, said I, and little Adele will clap her hands and jump to see you. But you know very well you are thinking of another than they, and that he is not thinking of you. They are making hay, too, in Thornfield. meadows, or rather, the labourers are just quitting their work and returning home with their rakes on their shoulders. Now, at the hour I arrive, I have but a field or two to traverse, and then I shall cross the road and reach the gates. How full the hedges are of roses! But I have no time to gather any. I want to be at the house. I pass a tall briar, shooting leafy and flowery branches across the path. I see the narrow stile with stone steps, and I see Mr. Rochester sitting there, a book and a pencil in his hand. He is writing. Well, he is not a ghost, yet every nerve I have is unstrung. For a moment I am beyond my own mastery. What does it mean? I did not think I should tremble in this way when I saw him, or lose my voice, or the power of motion in his presence. I will go back as soon as I can stir. I need not make an absolute fool of myself. I know another way to the house. It does not signify if I knew 20 ways, for he has seen me. Hello, he cries, and he puts up his book and his pencil. There you are. Come on, if you please. I suppose I do come on, though in what fashion I know not, being scarcely consignant of my movements, and solicitous only to appear calm, and, above all, to control the working muscles of my face, which I feel rebel insolently against my will, and struggle to express what I have resolved to conceal. But I have a veil. It is down. I may make shift yet to behave with decent composure. And this is Jane Eyre. Are you coming from Millcote, and on foot? Yes, just one of your tricks. Not to send for a carriage, and come clattering over street and road, like a common mortal, but to steal into the vicinage of your home, along with twilight, just as if you were a dream or a shade. What the deuce have you done with yourself this last month? I have been with my aunt, sir, who is dead. A true Janean reply. Good angels be my guard. She comes from the other world, from the abode of people who are dead, and tells me so when she meets me alone here in the gloaming. If I dared, I'd touch you to see if you are substance or shadow. You elf! But I'd as soon offer to take hold of a blue ignis fatuus light in a marsh. Truant, he added, when he had paused an instant. Absent from me a whole month, and forgetting me quite, I'll be sworn. I knew there would be a pleasure in meeting my master again, even though broken by the fear that he was so soon to cease to be my master, and by the knowledge that I was nothing to him. But there was ever in Mr. Rochester, so at least I thought, such a wealth of the power of communicating happiness, that to taste but of the crumbs he scattered beyond beauty. Mr. Rochester had sometimes read my outspoken thoughts with an acumen to me incomprehensible. In the present instance, he took no notice of my abrupt vocal response, but he smiled at me with a certain smile he had of his own, and which he used but on rare occasions. He seemed to think it too good for common purpose. It was the real sunshine of feeling. He shed it over me now. "Pass, Janet," said he, making room for me to cross the aisle. "Go up home and stay your weary little wandering feet at a friend's threshold." All I had now to do was to obey him in silence. No need for me to colloquy further. I got over the stile without a word, and meant to leave him calmly. An impulse held me fast. A force turned me round. I said, or something in me said for me, and in spite of me, "Thank you, Mr. Rochester, for your great kindness. I am strangely glad to get back to you, and wherever you are is my home, my only home." I walked on so fast that he could hardly have overtaken me had he tried. Little Adele was half wild with delight when she saw me. Mrs. Fairfax received me with her usual plain friendliness. Leah smiled, and even Sophie bid me bonsoir with glee. This was very pleasant. There is no happiness like that of being loved by your fellow creatures, and feeling that your presence is an addition to their comfort. I, that evening, shut my eyes resolutely against the future. I stopped my ears against the voice that kept warning me of near separation and coming grief. When tea was over, and Mrs. Fairfax had taken her knitting, and I had assumed a low seat near her, and Adele, kneeling on the carpet, had nestled close up to me, and a sense of mutual affection seemed to surround us with a ring of golden peace, I uttered a silent prayer that we might not be parted far too or soon. But when, as we thus sat, Mr. Rochester entered unannounced, and, looking at us, seemed to take pleasure in the spectacle of a group so amicable, when he said he supposed old lady was all right now, that she had got her adopted daughter back again, and added that he saw Adele was prête et coquette as petite maman anglaise, I had ventured to hope that he would, even after his marriage, keep us together, somewhere under the shelter of his protection, and not quite exiled from the sunshine of his presence. A fortnight of dubious calm succeeded my return to Thornfield Hall. Nothing was said of the master's marriage, and I saw no preparation going on for such an event. Almost every day I asked Mrs. Fairfax if she had yet heard anything decided. Her answer was always in the negative. Once, she said, she'd actually put the question to Mr. Rochester as to when he was going to bring his bride home. But he answered her only by a joke and one of his queer looks, and she could not tell what to make of him. Chapter 22. A splendid midsummer shone over England, skies so pure, sun so radiant, as were then seen in long succession, seldom favour, even singly, our wave-grit land. It was as if a band of Italian days had come from the south, like a flock of glorious passenger birds, and lighted to rest them on the cliffs of Albion. The hay was all got in, the fields round Thornfield were green and shorn, the roads white and baked, the trees were in their dark prime, hedge and wood, full-leaved and deeply tinted, contrasted well with the sunny hue of the cleared meadows between. On Midsummer Eve, Adele, weary with gathering wild strawberries, will never see me. A great moth goes humming by me. It alights me on a plant at Mr. Rochester's foot. He sees it and bends to examine it. Now he has his back towards me, thought I, and he is occupied too. Perhaps if I walk softly, I can slip away unnoticed. I trod on an edging of turf that the crackle of the pebbly gravel might not betray me. He was standing among the beds at a yard or two distant from where I had to pass. The moth apparently engaged him. I shook it by very well, I meditated, as I crossed the shadow thrown long over the garden by the moon, not yet risen high. He said quietly, without turning, "Jane, come and look at this fellow." I made no noise, yet he had not eyes behind. Could his shadow feel? I started at first, and then I approached him. "Look at his wings," said he. "He reminds me rather of a West Indian insect. One does not often see so large and gay a night rover in England. There, he is flown." The moth roamed away. I was sheepishly retreating also, but Mr. Rochester followed me, and when he reached the wicket, he said, "Turn back. On so lovely a night it is a shame to sit in the house, and surely no one can wish to go to bed while sunset is thus at meeting with moonrise. It is one of my faults that, though my tongue is sometimes prompt enough to answer, there are times when it sadly fails me in framing an excuse, and always the lapse occurs at some crisis, when a facial word or plausible pretext is specially wanted to get me out of painful embarrassment. I did not like to walk at this hour alone with Mr. Rochester in the shadowy orchard, but I could not find a reason to allege for leaving him. I followed with lagging step, and thoughts busily bent on discovering a means of extraction. But he himself looked so composed, and so grave also, I became ashamed of feeling any confusion. The evil, if evil existent or prospective there was, seemed to lie with me only. His mind was unconscious and quiet. "Jane," he recommenced, as we entered the laurel walk, and slowly strayed down in the direction of the sunk fence and the horse chestnut. "Thornfield is a pleasant place in summer, is it not?" "Yes, sir." "You must have become in some degree attached to the house, you who have an eye for natural beauties, and a good deal of the organ of adhesiveness." "I am attached to it, indeed, and though I do not comprehend how it is, I perceive you have acquired a degree of regard for that foolish little child Adele, too, and even for simple Dame Fairfax." "Yes, sir, in different ways I have an affection for both, and would be sorry to part with them. Yes." "Pity," he said, and sighed and paused. "It is always the way of events in this life," he continued presently. "No sooner have you got settled in a pleasant resting place than a voice calls out to you to rise and move on, for the hour of repose is expired." "Must I move on, sir?" I asked. "Must I leave Thornfield?" "I believe you must, Jane. I am sorry, Janet, but I believe, indeed, you must." This was a blow, but I did not let it prostrate me. "Well, sir, I shall be ready when the order to march comes." "It comes now. I must give it tonight." "Then you are going to be married, sir?" "Exactly. Precisely. With your usual acuteness, you've hit the nail straight on the head." "So soon, sir?" "Very soon, that is Miss Jane Eyre. And you'll remember, Jane, the first time I, or rumour, plainly intimated to you that it was my intention to put my old bachelor's neck into the sacred noose, to enter into the holy estate of matrimony, to take Miss Ingram to me, Jane. You're not turning your head to look after more moths, are you? There was only a lady clock of child flying away home. I wish to remind you that it was you who first said to me, with that discretion I respect in you, with that foresight, prudence, and humility which befit you, your responsible, independent position, that in case I married Miss Ingram, both you and little Adele had better trot forthwith. I pass over the sort of slur conveyed in this suggestion on the character of my beloved. Indeed, when you are far away, Janet, I'll try to forget it. I shall notice only its wisdom, which is such that I have made it my law of action. Adele must go to school, and you, Miss Eyre, must get a new situation. Yes, sir. I will advertise immediately, and meantime, I suppose I may stay here till I find another shelter to betake myself to. But I stopped, feeling it would not do to risk a long sentence, for my voice was not quite under command. In about a month, I hope to be a bridegroom, continued Mr. Rochester, and in the interim, I shall myself look out for employment and an asylum for you. Thank you, sir. I am sorry to give. Oh, no need to apologize. I consider it that when a dependent does her duty as well as you have done yours, she has a sort of calm upon her employer for any little assistance he can conveniently render her. Indeed, I have already, through my future mother-in-law, heard of a place that I think will suit. It is to undertake the education of the 5 daughters of Mrs. Dionysus O'Gall of Bitternut Lodge, Connaught, Ireland. You'll like Ireland, I think. They're such warm-hearted people there, they say. It is a long way off, sir. No matter. A girl of your sense will not object to the voyage or the distance. Not the voyage, but the distance. And then the sea is a barrier. From what, Jane? From England and from Thornfield and... well, from you, sir. I said this almost involuntarily, and with as little sanction of free will, my tears gushed out. I did not cry so as to be heard, however. I avoided sobbing. The thought of Mrs. O'Gall and Bitternut Lodge struck cold to my heart, and colder the thought of all the brine and foam, destined, as it seemed, to rush between me and the master at whose side I now walked, and the coldest, the remembrance of the wider ocean, wealth, caste, custom, intervened between me and what I naturally and inevitably loved. It is a long way, I again said. It is, to be sure, and when you get to Bitternut Lodge, Connaught, Ireland, I shall never see you again, Jane. That's morally certain. I never go over to Ireland, not having myself much of a fancy for the country. We have been good friends, Jane, have we not? Yes, sir. And when friends are on the eve of separation, they like to spend the little time that remains to them close to each other. Come, we'll talk over the voyage and the parting quietly, half an hour or so, while the stars enter into their shining life up in heaven yonder. Here is the chestnut tree. Here is the bench at its roots. Come, we will sit there in peace tonight, though we should never more be destined to sit there together. He seated me and himself. It's a long way to Ireland, Janet, and I am sorry to send my little friend on such weary travels. But if I can't do better, how is it to be helped? Are you anything akin to me, do you think, Jane? I could risk no sort of answer. By this time, my heart was still. Because, he said, I sometimes have a queer feeling with regard to you, especially when you are nearer to me, as now. It is as if I had a string somewhere under my left ribs, tightly and inextricably knotted to a similar string situated in the corresponding quarter of your little frame. And if that boisterous channel and 200 miles or so of land come broad between us, sir. You know, impossible to proceed. Jane, do you hear that nightingale singing in the wood? Listen. In listening, I sobbed convulsively, for I could repress what I endured no longer. I was obliged to yield, and I was shaken from head to foot with acute distress. When I did speak, it was only to express an impetuous wish that I had never been born, or never come to Thornfield, because you are sorry to leave it. The vehemence of emotion stirred by grief and love within me was claiming mastery and struggling for false way, and asserting a right to predominate, to overcome, to live, rise and reign at last, yes, and to speak. I grieve to leave Thornfield. I love Thornfield. I love it because I have lived in it a full and delightful life, momentarily at least. I have not been trampled on. I have not been petrified. I have not been buried with inferior minds and excluded from every glimpse of communion with what is bright and energetic and high. I have talked face to face with what I reverence and with what I delight in, with an original of vigorous and expanded mind. I have known you, Mr. Rochester, and it strikes me with terror and anguish to feel I absolutely must be torn from you forever. I see the necessity of departure, and it is like looking on the necessity of death. Where do you see the necessity? He asked suddenly. Where? You, sir, have placed it before me. In what shape? In the shape of Miss Ingram, a noble and beautiful woman, your bride. My bride? What bride? I have no bride. But you will have. Yes, I will. I will. He set his teeth. Then I must go. You have said it yourself. No, you must stay. I swear it, and the oath shall be kept. I tell you I must go, I retorted, roused to something like passion. Do you think I can stay to become nothing to you? Do you think I am an automaton, a machine without feelings, and can bear to have my morsel of bread snatched from my lips, and my drop of living water dashed from my cup? Do you think, because I am poor, obscure, plain, and little, I am soulless and heartless? You think wrong. I have as much soul as you, and full as much heart. And if God had gifted me with some beauty and much wealth, I should have made it as hard for you to leave me as it is now for me to leave you. I am not talking to you now through the medium of custom, conventionalities, nor even of mortal flesh. It is my spirit that addresses your spirit, just as if both had passed through the grave, and we stood at God's feet equal, as we are. As we are, repeated Mr. Rochester. So, he added, enclosing me in his arms, gathering me to his breast, pressing his lips to my lips. So, Jane. Yes, so, sir, I rejoined, and yet not so, for you are a married man, or as good as a married man, and wed to one inferior to you, to one with whom you have no sympathy, whom I do not believe you truly love. For I have seen and heard you sneer at her. I would scorn such a union. Therefore I am better than you. Let me go. Where, Jane? To Ireland. Yes, to Ireland. I have spoken my mind, and can go anywhere now. Jane, be still. Don't struggle so, like a wild, frantic bird that is rending its own plumage in its desperation. I am no bird, and no net ensnares me. I am a free human being, with an independent will, which I now exert to leave you. Another effort set me at liberty, and I stood erect before him. And your will shall decide your destiny, he said. I offer you my heart, my hand, and a share of all my possessions. You play a farce, which I merely laugh at. excited. I will be still too. A waft of wind came sweeping down the laurel walk and trembled through the boughs of the chestnut. It wandered away, away to an indefinite distance. It died. The nightingale's song was then the only voice of the hour. In listening to it, I again wept. Mr. Rochester sat quiet, looking at me gently and seriously. Some time passed before he spoke. He at last said, "Come to my side, Jane, and let us explain and understand one another. I will never come again to your side. I am torn away now and cannot return. But Jane, I summon you as my wife. It is only you I intend to marry." I was silent. I thought he mocked me. "Come, Jane, come hither. Your bride stands between us." He rose and with a stride reached to me. "My bride is here," he said, again drawing me to him, "because my equal is here, and my likeness. Jane, will you marry me?" Still I did not answer, and still I writhed myself from his grasp, for I was still incredulous. "Do you doubt me, Jane?" "Entirely." "You have no faith in me?" "Not a whit." "Am I a liar in your eyes?" he asked passionately. "Little sceptic, you shall be convinced. What love have I for Mrs. Ingram? None, and that you know. What love has she for me? None, as I have taken pains to prove. I caused the rumour to reach her that my fortune was not a third of what was supposed, and after that I presented myself to see the results. It was coldness both from her and her mother. I would not, I could not marry Miss Ingram. You strange, you almost unearthly thing. I love you as my own flesh. You, poor and obscure and small and plain, as you are. I entreat to accept me as a husband." "What, me?" I ejaculated, beginning in his earnestness, and especially in his incivility, to credit his sincerity. "Me, who have not a friend in the world but you. If you are my friend, not a shilling but what you have given me. You, Jane, I must have you for my own, entirely my own. Will you be mine?" nor did Mr. Rochester. The lamp was lit. The clock was on the stroke of 12. "Hasten to take off your wet things," said he. "And before you go, good night, my darling." He kissed me repeatedly. When I looked up on leaving his arms, there stood the widow, pale, grave, and amazed. I only smiled at her and ran upstairs. Explanation will do for another time, thought I. Still, when I reached my chamber, I felt a pang at the idea she should even temporarily misconstrue what she had seen. But joy soon effaced every other feeling, and, loud as the wind blew, near and deep as the thunder crashed, fierce and frequent as the lightning gleamed, cataract-like as the rain fell during the storm of 2 hours' duration, I experienced no fear and little awe. Mr. Rochester came thrice to my door in the course of it, to ask if I was safe and tranquil, and that was comfort. That was strength for anything. Before I left my bed in the morning, little Adele came running in to tell me that the great horse chestnut at the bottom of the orchard had been struck by lightning in the night, and half of it split away. Chapter 23. As I rose and dressed, I thought over what had happened, and wondered if it were a dream. I could not be certain of the reality till I had seen Mr. Rochester again, and heard him renew his words of love and promise. I took a plain but clean and light summer dress from my drawer and put it on. It seemed no attire had ever so well become me, because none had I ever worn in so blissful a mood. I was not surprised when I ran down into the hall to see that a brilliant June morning had succeeded to the tempest of the night, and to feel, through the open glass door, the breathing of a fresh and fragrant breeze. Mrs. Fairfax surprised me by looking out of the window with a sad countenance, and saying gravely, "Miss Eyre, will you come to breakfast?" During the meal she was quiet and cool, but I could not undeceive her then. I must wait for my master to give explanations, and so must she. I ate what I could, and then I hastened upstairs. I met Adele leaving the schoolroom. "Where are you going? It is time for lessons." "Mr. Rochester has sent me away to the nursery." "Where is he?" "In there," pointing to the apartment she had left, and I went in, and there he stood. "Come and bid me good morning," said he. I gladly advanced, and it was not merely a cold word now, or even a shake of the hand that I received, but an embrace and a kiss. It seemed natural, it seemed genial, to be so well loved, so caressed by him. "Jane, you look blooming and smiling and pretty," said he. "Truly pretty this morning. Is this my pale little elf? Is this my mustard seed? This little sunny-faced girl with the dimpled cheek and rosy lips, the satin smooth hazel hair, and the radiant hazel eyes. I had green eyes, reader, but you must excuse the mistake. For him they were new-dyed, I suppose. It is Jane Eyre, sir. Soon to be Jane Rochester," he added. "In 4 weeks, Janet. Not a day more. Do you hear that?" I did, and I could not quite comprehend it. It made me giddy. The feeling the announcement sent through me was something stronger than was consistent with joy. Something that smote and stunned. It was, I think, almost fear. "You blushed, and now you are white, Jane. What is that for?" "Because you gave me a new name, Jane Rochester, and it seems so strange." "Yes, Mrs. Rochester," said he. "Young Mrs. Rochester. Fairfax Rochester's girl bride." "It can never be, sir. It does not sound likely. Human beings never enjoy complete happiness in this world. was not born for a different destiny to the rest of my species. To imagine such a lot befalling me is a fairy tale, a daydream, which I can and will realize. I will make the world acknowledge you a beauty too, he went on, while I really became uneasy at the strain he had adopted, because I felt he was either deluding himself or trying to delude me. I will attire my Jane in satin and lace, and she shall have roses in her hair, and I will cover the head I love best with a priceless veil. And then you won't know me, sir, and I shall not be your Jane Eyre any longer, but an ape in a harlequin's jacket, a jay in borrowed plumes. I would as soon see you, Mr. Rochester, tricked out in stage trappings, as myself clad in a court lady's robe. And I don't call you handsome, sir, though I love you most dearly, far too dearly to flatter you. Don't flatter me. He perused his theme, however, without noticing my deprecation. I told you we shall be married in 4 weeks. The wedding is to take place quietly, in the church down below yonder, and then I shall waft you away at once to town. After a brief stay there, I shall bear my treasure to regions nearer the sun, to French vineyards and Italian plains, and she shall see whatever is famous in old story and in modern record. She shall taste too of the life of cities, and she shall learn to value herself by just comparison with others. Shall I travel, and with you, sir? You shall sojourn at Paris, Rome, and Naples, at Florence, Venice, and Vienna. All the ground I have wandered over shall be trodden by you. Wherever I stamped my hoof, your slive's foot shall step also. 10 years since, I flew through Europe half mad, with disgust, hate, and rage as my companion. Now I shall revisit it, healed and clean and cleansed, with a very angel as my comforter. Well then, sir, have the goodness to gratify my curiosity, which is much piqued on one point. He looked disturbed. What? He said hastily. Curiosity is a dangerous petition. It is well I have not taken a vow to accord every request. There, you are less than civil now, and I like rudeness a great deal better than flattery. This is what I have to ask. Why did you take such pains to make me believe you wished to marry Miss Ingram? Well, I feigned courtship of Miss Ingram because I wished to render you as madly enough with me as I was with you, and I knew jealousy would be the best ally I could call in for the furtherance of that end. Excellent. Now you are small, not one whit bigger than the end of my little finger. It was burning shame and a scandalous disgrace to act in that way. Did you think nothing of Miss Ingram's feelings, sir? Her feelings are concentrated in one, pride, and that needs humbling. Were you jealous, Jane? Never mind, Mr. Rochester. It is in no way interesting to you to know that. Answer me truly once more. Do you think Miss Ingram will suffer from your dishonest coquetry? Won't she feel forsaken and deserted? Impossible. When I told you how she, on the contrary, deserted me, the for I lay that pleasant unction to my soul, Jane, a belief in your affection. I turned my lips to the hand that lay on my shoulder. I loved him very much, more than I could trust myself to say, more than words had power to express. Ask something more, said he presently. It is my delight to be entreated and to yield. I was again ready with my request. Communicate your intentions to Mrs. Fairfax, sir. She saw me with you last night in the hall, and she was shocked. Give her some explanation before I see her again. It pains me to be misjudged by so good a woman. Go to your room and put on your bonnet, he replied. I mean you to accompany to Millcote this morning, and while you prepare for the drive, I will enlighten the old lady's understanding. Did she think, Janet, you had given the world for love, and considered it well lost? I believe she thought I had forgotten my station, and yours, sir. Station. Your station is in my heart, and on the necks of those who would insult you, now or hereafter. Go. I was soon dressed, and when I heard Mr. Rochester quit Mrs. Fairfax's parlour, I hurried down to it. Seeing me, she roused herself. She made a sort of effort to smile, and framed a few words of congratulation, but the smile expired, and the sentence was abandoned, unfinished. She put up her spectacles, and pushed her chair back from the table. I feel so astonished, she began. I hardly know what to say to you, Miss Eyre. I could never have thought it. He is a proud man. All the Rochesters were proud, and his father, at least, liked money. He, too, has always been called careful. He means to marry you. He tells me so. She surveyed